And I went ahead and knitted up to this point. Now, like I said on that one page, you have to have 8 ridges after, let me enlarge this a bit, 8 ridges after your buttonhole. And there's my buttonhole. So 8 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Number 8 is on my needle. So I know I'm ready to start the next buttonhole. For a boy, you would do it at the beginning of this row. If it was a girl, you would knit all the way over here to do your buttonhole at this end. Now, one of the last pages I do have a little gauge here. So if you count, let's see, there's, what is this, on roll 9, which is 83, roll 11 would be 91, and see, I counted and I do have 91, so that's roll 11. Roll 13, B8 stands for doing a buttonhole on this roll, and then you have a total of 99 stitches. So that was for the size 0 to 3 months. Now, if you're doing the 6 to 9 months, your first buttonhole will not come until roll 15, and then on the 12 to 9, your buttonhole won't start to roll 17. And then also the second buttonhole, the third buttonhole I have listed here too. So that'll help keep you in count. As long as you have that many stitches when you get to each of these sections just before a buttonhole, then you know you're doing right. So the next one I would do would be a buttonhole roll. Like I said, this is one where you knit 2, yarn over, knit 2 together, because you do not want to add an extra stitch. So we knit 2. Yarn over, because that's our buttonhole, knit 2 together, and then knit across. Okay, if I stop there, and I see I still got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I still got my 5 garter stitches, which is my button band. And then you continue knitting. When you get to the marker, or 1 stitch before the marker, you would do your increase again. So you always do your increase, the stitch before the marker and the 1 stitch after the marker. So let me get to the first marker. Okay, so I'm at the increase again. Like we did before, you knit in the front and the back loop of the same stitch, slip your marker, knit in the front and back loop of the same stitch. And so now I've got my next increase. You can always tell if you got your increases on each row, because you'll see those little dashes on either side of your marker. Then you know you've done your increase, and then you just keep continuing. Now we're going to knit for another 8 ridges, just like the pattern says. And when I get to the next 8th ridge, I'll be ready to do the next buttonhole. Okay, I went ahead and did 1 row. So here's the original buttonhole row, and then there's the 8 ridges, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is a small size. And I think you do 9 ridges on the next size, 10, 11, and so on as you go do your sizes. And then I did my buttonhole, so ridge 9 is after the buttonhole. So then I'll do another 7 ridges up here, because I need 8 between each buttonhole on this size. And I realized I did make an error on here. This actually should be row 15, not 13, because when I actually counted from here to this point was 10 rolls. So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and these are the other 2 I just did. So when I go, I'm going to alter the pattern to this afternoon and change this to show the corrected rolls. Because so row 15 is a buttonhole, row 31 is a buttonhole on this size, and then it stops because there's only 3 buttonholes on the small size. On the next size up, there's still 3 buttonholes, and they're at the same location. But when you get into the 6 to 9 months, it skips down 1 more ridge. And then when you get to the larger size, it skips down even another ridge. So I will make those corrections. And as soon as I have it all checked out, I will put it out there on the internet so you can download a new revised version. And if you bought it through Stitch Knit, it doesn't have the ability to automatically send you the download like Ravelry does. So just send me an email and I'll be very happy to send you a revised pattern for free. And I'll continue working on it. So as soon as I get these next 7 ridges done, I'll come back and show you where I'm at and where we go from there. Okay, I'm still working on the yoke. This is the last roll of the yoke before the last buttonhole. You go ahead and get this one done. I'm near the end, so I thought it'd be a good time to pick up and continue on. Now this whole project takes me roughly 14 to 16 hours, but I'm trying to abbreviate it down to about 1 hour, maybe an hour and a half. I have to decide whether I want to break it into 3 or 4 parts or just do one big super long video. I'm still working on that aspect, but okay, I'm down to the last 5, so those have to be knitted, because when you do the back side, you knit 5, purl to the last 5, and knit 5. That gives you your garter stitch roll on both ends. There's the one on this side, and there's the one on this side. Now I should have 8 ridges between my buttonholes. So I got my first buttonhole here. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're good there. And here's my second buttonhole, and I should have 8 ridges. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The 8th one is on my needle. And now this is for the newborn size. The newborn size has 8 ridges between each buttonhole. The next size has 9. The next size has 10 ridges, and the 1-year size has 11 ridges. That adds an extra 6 rolls per ridge. Per size. Okay, so let's get on to the next section where it says, right there, continue repeating rows 1 and 2 for 8 more ridges, and then repeat the boy or girl buttonhole for the total of 3 buttonholes in the yoke. So it's 1, 2, and the last one will be 3. So to repeat the buttonhole, we knit for the boy's side, you knit 2, yarn over, knit 2 together, and then knit 1. So that gives you your 5 stitches again and your final buttonhole, and then you want to continue across, so you keep on knitting. You have 1 more knit and 1 more purl, and then that will end all the yoke knitting, and then we're going to break it apart and separate it into the front, the sleeves, and the back. Now there's 2 ways to do it. There's the way using stitch holders, which I really don't care for. It's just a lot of extra cumbersome hardware, or just work with it right off your circular needles. So I'm going to show you both ways, and then of course you choose which way you prefer to do it. I'm to the first stitch marker because we're still doing increases. This will be the last set of increases, so knit in the front and the back of the same stitch, slip your marker. See, I've kept the marker for the entire length. And then same thing, knit in the front and back of the same stitch. So that's your final increase for the sleeve front. Then you would knit all the way across. Let me pull the stitches up here of the sleeve. You just keep on working. It's the same thing. I'm not going to do the whole knitting rows because you know how to knit, and there's no need for me to waste your time having you watch me knit every single stitch going on one side and then turning the work and seeing every single purl on the other side. I just want to get to the next marker, which is coming up. See, this is a 24-inch circular needle, and as you can tell, all the stitches fit on a 24-inch circular needle. That's the reason why I like to use a 24. You can use a 29 if you want to have just a little more easing room. It's entirely up to you, but you really don't want to get too much more above that. Okay, so here's my next increase. Slip your marker, and then your next increase. So now you have 2 more increases. So you do a total of 8 increases on every knit roll. Okay, well, I'll keep on going. I'll pause the video until I get back around to this spot again, and then I'll show you how to start splitting things apart. Now I've completed the last and final purl roll, so now I have buttonhole, 8 ridges, buttonhole, 8 ridges, buttonhole, and I finished with the purl side. So at this point, we want to cut your thread because we want to have this to knit this section here, and then when we join it to the back on this side, we can join it under the arm and we won't have the join on this edge. I don't like to join them on the edge because it makes it kind of thick. So I give myself a good 2 feet, and even if you give yourself a little bit more, it won't hurt because it's nice to have it. Now, how do you keep it from getting all tangled? I use a bread wrapper tab. Now, if it's just a small amount, I'll use the little short one, but since this is a fairly decent amount of thread, I'd rather use the one that's a little bit longer. So you just wrap it around. It's almost like a yarn bobbin. It's just on a little bit smaller scale, and you wrap your yarn around it, and this will keep it for you. Generally, after I get it wrapped, I will take one of my little plastic safety pins and just kind of pin it to my work. That way it doesn't bang around. It's just something I do. You don't have to do this. I just hate having it bang around because it'll hang and kind of wiggle all over, and it might start untwisting. So I just do that, and it kind of keeps it for me. All right, now the next part is separating it. Now, like I said, there's 2 ways of separating it. There's the way I do it, where I work right off my circular needles, and then there's the way a lot of people like to do it, which are stitch holders. Now, personally, I don't like these type of stitch holders. They're very small and very narrow, and when you try to take them on and off of your work, it can be a little bit of a challenge. I'll put the first one on one of these. So you can see how it goes on. It goes on easy, but then while you're trying to work it or get the stitches off of this, they wiggle all over the place. Now then also we need to take our marker off, or I'm just going to put it on there because I want to keep it. All right, and then you do that with the other 5 sections. Like I said, I don't care for that. I like to use these things. And then you can see you can stick a needle on it. And then, let me get this over here, slide your work onto it, just like you did the other. It's just a little bit of a challenge. You get them all slid on. And then once you have them on, you take another one of the buttons. Oh, I'm sorry, slide it off, take the needle out, and then put the other button on. And that acts as another stitch holder. Then when you get ready to knit it, you don't have to slide it onto your knitting needle. You just put the needle on the other side and just knit it off. Now, if you'd like to know what I'm using, it's this. It's the Denise interchangeable knitting needles. You can order these directly from them at www.knitdenise.com. They are made here in the USA, and they give you quite a variety of needles. I think they start with a size 5 and go up to a 15, and they have the string part or the middle part from 9-inch all the way up to like 24 inch. And then if you need something even bigger, you would take one of the connectors, put it on and twist it, and then grab another one, put it on, and now it makes you can make you a longer one before you put your needle on it. These are great for traveling. They're great for making anything because you can make this as long as you want, or you can keep it as short as you want. But these needles do not bend. I mean, you can't put them on an angle like some of the 9-inch circular needles that I think Susan Bates carried. They would have a slight crook here. These aren't. These are perfectly straight. But this is another option. Like I said, I prefer to use these if I'm having to put them on stitch holders. So now if I go to this one, I take another stitch holder, put a needle on it, slide them off, I think I grabbed a needle that was a little bit too big because these are not slipping off as easy as they should. So once I get this one off, I'm going to grab a smaller needle. Probably would have been better if I grabbed the 6. I probably have the 7 or the 8. But that's okay. I can pull the other needle out in just a second. I want to get this on so you can see how you do it. But you put all 5 sections on separate stitch holders because each section is done individually. Okay, now I get another pin. Slide it down. Take the needle off, hook the pin on. Okay, now I have another section set with on this particular type of stitch holder. I'm grabbing a thinner needle. I got a little bit thinner one here. Okay, same thing. Put it on another stitch holder. Slide these off. And I also know Clover makes another type of a stitch holder. I did not bring one of them home from my shop. If I think about it tomorrow, I'll bring one home to show you what it looks like. There's a variety of things you can do. You can also weave a piece of thread through your work and then use thread, or I should say yarn, as your stitch holder. That works too. Okay, I get this one on, pull it through. Put another button on. Okay, I'm down to my last one. I need another button. There it is. Okay. Put a button on the end. Put your needle on the other end. And put the last one on. Okay, there's the last one. And I'll put the button on. Okay, so now this one is ready to knit as all individual pieces because you would knit them individually. I used only one of these because I only have one because I really don't like using them. They're just a little too wonky for my use. So what I'm going to do now is put these back. Okay, after you get to this point, I'll go ahead and go to the next spot. You do not knit the front. You leave these alone. I'm just going to do this so maybe it'll stay out of my way a little better. And in this case, I have to put the needle on. I need a size 6. That looks like a 6. I'll get a 6 just to be safe. Okay. Now the directions say to cast on, grab my other needle here, cast on 3 stitches. So what I do is I do what's called a cable cast on. You need to leave yourself a long tail, at least 12 inches, because this tail you're going to use to sew your seam up with on your sleeve, because this, what the part we're doing is the sleeve. So attach your yarn to a needle, a straight needle, your circular needle, whichever needle you want. You're going to do what's called a cable cast. Oh, no, I'm sorry. You cast on 3 stitches like that. Okay, so now I got my 3 stitches, and same thing, you can get another one of these ties, bread wrapper ties, wrap the thread around it. This is your tail. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that anymore. Now you want to go ahead and start knitting. You knit across the sleeve. I'm going to do this part mainly because I want to show how it's done. And as you see, this is why I don't like these. They just always seem to get in my way. But for those who like using stitch holders, that's why I'm showing this way. And then I'm going to show the way I like to do it, which is a little bit different. I'm going all the way across the sleeve. I don't have that many more left. It looks like about 15 more. Looks like about 10. Then when you get to the other end, you want to cast on 3 stitches. Now on this end, we don't have the tail to do a long tail cast on. And I like to do a cast on that has a little bit of body to it. So I don't like to just do the one where you just flip it over your thumb and call it a day. Okay, so I've got that one done. So now I got all the sleeve ones on my needle. Now a lot of ladies will just go ahead and quickly just do this and do 1, 2, 3, which you can. That's perfectly fine. I like to add a little bit more stout to mine. So what I do, let me grab the other end, is do what's called a cable cast on. Let me enlarge this a little bit. Okay, a cable cast on is you actually kind of knit. In a way, you insert your needle and knit. But after you get your first stitch, you don't pull this one off your needle. You leave it on the needle. Instead, turn this needle backwards and go in the back side of that loop. And now you put it on there, and that caused a little bit of a cable twist. So now let's do another one. Insert your your needle, yarn over, pull it out, leave this on your needle, turn your needle over, and put this in the back side. One more. Turn it and go in the back. There are several different variations of doing this cable cast on. That's just the way I like doing it. Now if I turn it over, you see it has a nice little twist in between each stitch. Okay, and then you would purl back. The first 1 or 2 can be a little trying, so just take your time. It will work. And once you get past these 3 cable cast-ons, you're back on your actual needle. Okay, so now I'm on my regular stitches now. I'll go ahead and get them all done. I'll go across and I'll show you what it looks like and then what I do next and the reason why I do it. Whether I do it with the stitch holders like this or whether I do it on my circular needles, I still use a pen, and I'll explain why in just a second. Let me go ahead and get all the way across. Get it closer. Now whether you do it this way or the circular way, a safety pin marker is very useful on the next portion. And I'll tell you why in just a second. I'm almost done. I just don't want to get ahead of myself. Now as you're working this, you can always pause the video and catch up to where I'm at, because I do jump ahead sometimes because I know you don't need to watch me knit and purl 16 rolls. Okay, just about done. Now I'm to the original 3 that I casted on. Catch them. Try not to pull or stretch the threads beneath it, because that can make it a little bit loose. Okay, so I got those on there. All right, now I've got the sleeve stitches on plus the extra 6. These 6 over here are the ones that'll go under the underarm, and you need those to add a little bit of underarm width. So at this point I take a pin and I put it in the roll underneath the one that's on my needle. I always take it down 2. I'm sorry, take it down 2. Let's see, that way it's easier to count. Okay. Now as I knit, I can count how many rolls. Not counting, let me enlarge this. Not counting the one that my pin is in, I count the one above the pin as my first roll, and the one on my needle is roll number 2. Now when I do the sleeve for the baby size, I think I do 32 rolls before I do the band. So you can use these and count up. After you do 10 rolls, put another pin, go up another 10, put another pin. It's a quick, easy way to count. And also if you're doing it with the circular needles, you can't lay it down flat, because the circular needle method I do keeps them kind of bunched up. And this pin helps keep track of what row you're on. So okay, and then after you get all those done and you finish the whole sleeve, then you go over here and do the same thing on the second sleeve, because this is your back, so you don't want to skip that one. You want to do your sleeve because this is your other front. Let me go ahead and take these off these stitch holders now and put it back on my circular needles, and I'll show you how I like to do it. Okay, and now I have it all back on my circular needles again. Like I said, I'm going to show you how I like to do it. I just don't like dealing with all those stitch markers. So like we did before, we have to do the sleeve first, so we're not going to use the fronts. But instead of putting the front on a stitch holder, I'm just going to slide them to the other needle. So my other needle becomes my stitch holder, and the yarn doesn't get in the way, the piece doesn't get in the way, there's no pins to get in the way. Okay, and I don't need the marker. Okay, so we'll do the same thing as we did before. Leave a piece about a foot long and put it on your needle, your right hand needle, and you want to cast on a total of 3 stitches. So there's 1, 2, 3. And then like before, I take my tail and I wrap it on my bread tab. That way it doesn't get in my way. That's good enough. And then we start knitting. And we knit, this one's turned around. And we knit to the next marker, just like we had done when they were on the stitch holders. Same thing, but as you see, there's no holders to get in my way. All the stitches stay nice and quiet on the actual needle, and then when you need to move things around, you just slide them from one needle to the next. We'll get to that, and I'll show you how that's done as we get to that point, but that's not yet. That's a bit ahead, and I don't want to jump ahead and confuse anybody. So let's go ahead and see. Since I had to take them off needle, some of mine split a little bit, so I'm having to make a few adjustments as I go across. That's another reason I don't like stitch holders, because it's so easy when you put them back on the needle to split your stitches or have them turn. I'm sure a lot of you have had issues where stitches were turned around when you slipped them back on the needle. I can get into that later on to show you what happens when that happens. How's that for bad English? Okay, so I'm done and I'm to the next marker, set the next marker. Now we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to turn our work and we're going to do a cable cast on just like we did before. Because we still have to cast on 3 stitches on either side of the sleeve. There, okay, I got my 3 stitches on. You don't want them to be too tight, so you want them to be able to slide comfortably across your needles. Now we're going to purl back just like we did before. And there's also another reason why I like to put a stitch marker every 10 rolls, because the directions say to decrease a stitch on each side of the sleeve every 10 rolls. That way it's not as big and baggy at the cuff as it is up under the arm. So the stitch marker helps when you start doing your counting. So we'll get to that also. I'm just right now just trying to get across to the other side, and then I'll set my marker, and then we can go from there. But as you see, not having the stitch holders, it's almost like just working in the round like we were doing before when we were working on the yoke. And I'll show you what I do as I move them around so you'll have an idea of where I go next. But at this point, all we're worrying about is the sleeve, so we don't want to jump ahead. Just about done with this. Oh, just a few more stitches to go. Now you can leave the marker on if you want to, if it would help you to know that you're at the right spot. See, I know I have these 3 at the end to do, but if you had left the marker on at this point, you would have known that's where you would have stopped. All right, let me take it off. Now you turn your work around, and the same thing as before, you want to set your a marker of some kind 2 rows down. Okay, so I'm 2 rows down. Now you can use any type of marker you want. You can use a split marker, you can use a safety pin, you can use a piece of thread, use one of these clover safety pin markers. It's entirely up to you. You just have to be able to mark that stitch, and there's a real important reason for that. Okay, so I'm going to continue working on this until I get 10 rows done, and then I'll be back and explain the next step. Okay, I think I'm just about done with row 10. And then after I do this, we'll lay it down and count it. There we go. Now you can see all these front stitches staying quietly on this needle and not getting in the way, except for the little tab there. And then the others are setting on this side. The only drawback is it's very hard as you get up further to measure it if you wanted to measure it. So what I usually do by the time I get to roll 20 or so, I switch from my circular needles and just do my sleeve back and forth on straight needles. I'll show you that when I get to it. So let's count here. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now I can't put the marker there because they're still on the needle. So I'm going to do my decreases and purl back, and then I can place my marker. So when I do my decrease, I never decrease on the first and the last stitch. I like to save those to do the seam, and it helps keep track of where you're at. So I knit the first one, and then I believe it's an SSK on this side. Now an SSK, you can either slip, and then put them back on the needle, and then knit the 2 together. I found that takes a lot of time and sometimes stretches the stitches out. So what I like to do is I just like to knit 2 together through the back loop. That does the same thing as an SSK, and it does turn the stitches the correct direction. Because when you do a knit 2 together, the stitches turn the other direction. So I just found doing the SSK works. Now I do have a video out there that shows the different ways of knitting two together. You just have to do a little bit of research. Just go into my YouTube account, Stitch Niche, and look at the one. I'll look it up and see what it says, so when I get back the next time I can tell you what it's called. But at this point we're just knitting across. There's nothing fancy about doing the sleeve. It's just fairly straightforward knitting. I designed this sweater this way so a beginner or an intermediate could make the sweater with just a little bit of help. If I'd added cables and yarn overs and all kinds of lace work to it, it might have been more beyond their ability, and I wanted to make sure anybody that wanted to knit this sweater could, because it's basically just knit and purl. Now I'm down to my last 3 stitches, so you would knit the next 2 together like I did. You just put the needle through 2 stitches from the front. The other time we did 2 stitches through the back, but this time it's 2 stitches through the front and then knit the last one. And by doing that, you see it turns it so it lays the right direction. If you did it the other way, it would twist and you'd be able to see it, and you don't want to see it. Then you turn your work and purl back. Whoops, don't want to slip off the needle. So see, doing it on a circular needle this way is just as easy. To me, it's less cumbersome because I don't have all those stitch holders banging my hands and getting in my way. And also, I devised this method back around 2000 or so. My father was very ill, and I was flying back and forth between here and his home in Iowa, and it was after 9/11, and you could not take knitting needles with you on the plane. They would allow you short wooden circular needles, but that was all you could take. So I knew they would not allow me to bring a stitch marker like this, because they consider that a deadly weapon because you could pull it open and stab somebody with it. So I devised this method of using just my circular needles as I was traveling back and forth. So that's the history of how I started doing it this way. And once I found it worked very nicely, I never went back to the stitch holders. As I said before, I don't really have very many stitch holders other than the one I just showed you. And when I do need to use stitch holders, I use my Denise needles, because then I can knit right off of the Denise needle instead of slipping them off the stitch holder onto a needle and then knitting. There's pros and cons to both ways. You do the way that you're the most comfortable with. All right, so I've purled back. So now I go here and you count 10 rolls, not counting the roll that your marker's on. That's why I put the marker down too. That way you can count the first stitch as 1. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And it's still the same. You have 1 stitch and then the 1 stitch on the needle, because that would be roll 11 and 12. Now I'll go again for another 10 rolls, and then the same thing, you decrease at either end of row 10. So you're reducing it just a smidgen so it's more of a angular shape, so it's not quite so floppy at the cuff. Okay, I'll get back to you again when I hit the 10 mark. Okay, I've got the next 10, but as you see, if I tried to lay this flat to measure it, it would be very difficult to get an accurate reading, because it likes to pucker at this point, because I'm leaving everything on the circular. So I would use my straight needles at this point, leaving this alone. Sometimes I take it back further, that way it stays out of my way. Bring these to the front, just like we've been doing. And then, of course, this is another decrease roll. I'll show you on the pattern after I get this roll done. So this is knit 2 together through the back loop, or SSK. And then you knit across to the last 3 stitches, and I'll show you how nice and flat it lays. But this is the only time on the sweater that I use straight needles. Now I do use straight needles for the hat, the mittens, and the booties. So the straight needles are used more than just once in a pattern. If you already know your amount of rolls that you're going to be doing, because you've made it before, you wouldn't have to switch to the straight needles. You can continue on with the circular because you already know how many stitch rows you need because you've got your markers and you already measured it out once before. Let's get to the end real quick here. And then I'll also get out the pattern and show you where we're at on the pattern. Because I haven't been following the pattern per se. I've done this thing so many times, I really don't even look at the pattern anymore. Okay, just about there. Okay, I have my 3 left, so I knit 2 together and then knit 1. Now, as you see, when you lay it, it'll lay nice and flat. So when you go to measure it, you measure from the needle to your marker, and in this case, I'm at about 2 and 3. Oh, bring it up. I'm at about 2 3/4 inches, and according to the pattern, here you say work in stockinette at the same time, decrease 1 stitch every 10 rows twice for the small one. 2 times, continuing in stockinette until the sleeve measures 4.5 inches, or stop 1 inch short to follow the baby blossom video for the color change. We're not going to get into that because we're not doing baby blossom, but we want to go ahead and do for 4.5 inches. And as it stands right now, like I said, we're at 2 3/4, and I would purl back using my straight needles, and all the other stitches stay put. They won't go anywhere, which is nice. You don't need to use point protectors or any other way to hold your stitches on your needles because they stay far enough back on the needle. They won't fall off unless you physically pull them off. After working with circulars, it feels a little bit odd working with straight needles. But as you see, the circulars don't get in your way like the stitch holders do. I'm definitely not a lover of stitch holders, as you can tell, but there are some cases where you just have to use a stitch holder in order to work on a project, and in that case I will use my stitch holder. Oh, we're just about done here, and then we'll place our next marker. I'm just about done. Three more stitches. Okay, there. Now I've got to put my marker at row 10 again. Let me bring this up a bit. Get my next marker. This will be the last marker. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Just like before. And you still have the 1 stitch ahead of the marker and the stitches on the marker. So at this point I've done 10, 20, 22. Like I said, I need to go to 4.5, and as you can see, whoops, I still have a ways to go to hit 4.5. And it looks like 10 rolls is roughly 1.5. So if I bring it to here and do it the 1.5 mark, that's backwards. If I drop this down to 1.5, as you can see, 10 more rolls will make it 4.5. Did you see how I did that? If 1.5 equals 10 rolls, if I drop this down to 1.25, right there, it makes it 4.25, which means I would need 10, maybe another 12 rolls in order to complete this. So that would actually make it 10, 20, 32, 34. That'd make it about 34 or 36. And we'll see when we get there. But let me go ahead and pause the camera while I go ahead and do the next 12 rows. Okay, I'm up to where I'm at the 4.5 mark. I went ahead and added another marker to show you where I did the 10. And if you count past that, I think there's 4 rows above it. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I went ahead and knitted the next row. because when you read the pattern, it says start the cuff, change back to the yoke color. That's if you had a different color for the yoke. If not, continue with the existing color. Knit 2 rows. Okay, so we'll go to the knit 2 rows. So I went ahead and knitted 1. So on this side, we're actually going to knit on the purl side. That's going to give us the ridge we need to start showing the star stitch again. Because at this point, we're going to do the star stitch pattern. And I'm only going to do it once, although you'd have to do it twice. But I figured I'll show you once, and you can always slide back the little bar and look at it again and to watch it a second time for the repeat. It just doesn't seem like I should show you the same thing 2 times in a row when you can just kind of like rewind and go back. Okay, I'm just trying to hurry up to get back over to the other end. And then we'll read what's next on the pattern because it just starts off saying knit 2 rows. So we're just going to take it one step at a time, and we're going to start by knitting 2 rows. And we're almost done with this second row. It seems odd to knit on the purl side, but we need to do that in order to get the design effect we're looking for. Okay, we've done that. Okay, now it says we knitted the 2 rows. Now work rows 1 through 4 of the star stitch pattern twice. So I need to put this aside because we know what we have to do. Take the first page again. Okay, the first 2 rows is knit again. So we knit 2 more rows. That's the reason why I went ahead and just did it the way I did. So you can see I had to knit 2 rows to get it started and then knit 2 more rows, which is part of the pattern. Otherwise, if you don't knit 2 sets of 2, the first band or the first ridge disappears and you won't see it. So if you're knitting and you forget to do the second 2 rows of knit and it doesn't look quite right, that's the reason why you had forgot to do the second row of knit. So I'm going to go ahead and go across. It won't take long to do 4 rows. And we haven't showed the star stitch row since the first video, part 1. I decided I'm going to make these into parts. Part 1 is the introductory and how to get the neck started and the yoke started. And then part 2 is finishing up the yoke, separating the parts and doing the sleeves. So part 3 will be joining the front and the back together and finishing it up. Figured that'd be the easiest way to do it. Okay, so now that's 1 row of knit. Now we got to do the second row of knit. I know the pattern thing is moving, but we already know what we're doing here, so we can look at the pattern thing again once I get this last row done. Then there's only 2 more rows left, and then we repeat rows 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are the star stitch pattern rows. Now, you can do as many repeats as you want. I just know 2 is sufficient in order to make the sleeve the length necessary for the age. I think it has to be 5.5 for a newborn. So the 6 rows total that you do, 10 rows total that you do in making the sleeve cuff pattern the way I wrote it, it works out to about 1 inch or a smidgen more than 1 inch. So that gives you your 5.5. And then we'll bind off, and I'll explain the reason why I bind off on the side that I bind off on. Okay, there we go. We're just about done with row 2. Now row 3, we'll enlarge it a little bit. Row 3 says to knit 1, skip 1, or slip 1 as if to purl, knit 1, and then repeat what's in the brackets. Slip 1 as if to purl, knit 1. So when we're finishing, we should be finishing with a knit 1. That's why we started with a knit 1. Okay, so we knit 1, slip as if to purl, knit 1, slip as if to purl, knit 1, slip as if to purl, knit 1, And we just do this all the way across. And just keep going. Don't change your stitch pattern. And see, when you purl that one, you end with this knit one. So you know you ended right when you end with a knit one. Now, row 4, you knit one, and then with the yarn in front, slip one as if to purl, then move the yarn to the back and knit one. So you don't knit or purl the second one, just like we did here. We're going to slip as if to purl. We're going to do the same here, slip as if to purl, but we're going to move the yarn from the front to the back, or I can say from the back to the front and the front to the back. Okay, so let's kind of enlarge this a little bit so we can get a closer look of it. Now, we knit one, bring the yarn to the front, slip as if to purl, yarn to the back, knit one. Yarn to the front, slip one, yarn to the back, knit one. Yarn to the front, slip one, yarn to the back, knit one. Yarn to the front. Now you know you're slipping the right one when you slip the one that wasn't knitted, because you can see this is the actual thread from the knitted one from the previous row. So we always want to slip the one that has not been knitted. Let's see. I kind of shortened the process by, I'll show you how. I will, even though I'm getting ready to purl this one, I go ahead and bring the yarn to the back. That way when I pull it off, the yarn's in the back. Then when I do the knit, the front one, I knit it. And before I take it off, I bring the yarn to the front. So when I take it off, the yarn's in the front again. So then I go to slip one, put the yarn to the back, slip it off. And then when I go to knit, yarn over to knit, before I take it off the needle, I bring the yarn to the front. It just makes it go a little bit quicker. It's a few less hand motions. You got to do them anyway, so I just incorporate them together. But if you like to do it the regular way, where you bring the yarn to the front, slip, take the yarn to the back, knit, you're more than welcome to do it this way. See, I'm so used to doing it that way, I don't even realize I'm doing it. Yarn to the front, slip one, yarn to the back, knit one. Yarn to the front, slip one, yarn to the back, knit one. Yarn to the front, slip one, yarn to the back, knit one. Now we're down to the last two. Slip one, knit one. Okay. Now that was rows 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the pattern. Now it says to repeat it. When we looked at this one, it says work rows 1 through 4 of the star stitch twice, and we've done it once. So now we're going to repeat it. We're going to knit these two, and then we're going to do the star stitch. And after we do that, I'll come back and show you how I finish. All right, I went ahead and did the second set of the star stitch, and then after you do the star stitch, it wants you to knit 2 more rows before you bind off. So I went ahead and knitted the other 2 rows. The reason for that is it gives you the ridge before and the ridge after the 2 sets of the star stitch. Now for the bind off, we actually bind off from the front for 2 reasons. One is that's where the yarn has taken us. 2, if you went ahead and knit it across, you'd have another odd looking roll to bind off, and it would have a different look. You wouldn't have a nice ridge on the front. You'd have a different kind of look. You can do that if you like. I prefer to knit it on the front. So to do a bind off is you knit the first 2. I'm sure you know how to bind off, but for those that are learning, I'll go ahead and do it. Let me enlarge this a little bit, get this out of the way so we have a nice dark background. take the first stitch over the second stitch. Now you want to stay loose. You don't want to be tight, because if you're tight, then the bottom of your sleeve gets really tight and it won't stretch. So keep it as loose as you can. If you cannot keep it loose, you can always go up one size in your knitting needle when you do the bind off. So instead of using a 6, you can always use a 7. And that would make your stitches a little bit looser. I like to stay close to my tip, but not right on the tip. A lot of knitting is personal preferences. I've always said, as long as the finished project looks like it's supposed to and it's the size it's supposed to be, then you've done it correctly. I've got a little, there it goes. I had a little thread caught. So instead of finishing it, I took it back and just started it again. So enjoy what you're doing. Don't criticize yourself too much on your first try. Everybody has to start somewhere. And the first one is not always the best. The second one is better. The third one is better. And the more you do, the more proficient you get, the more even your stitches get. And you'll get to where you enjoy working on it more. So keep it up. Don't stop. Just because the first one doesn't come out right, that's okay. My first one wasn't perfect either. I've been at this for many, many years. So don't think because mine looks like this, yours will never look like this. Yours will too. I just won't mention how many decades I've been doing this. That's the only clue I'm going to give you as to how long I've been knitting. I'm just about done, but as you see, I'm just knitting very loosely. I'm not tugging or pulling on the yarn at all. I'm just holding it in my hand. As you can see, it's really, really loose. But just take your time at it. Everybody finds their own niche when they're knitting. Now, I know you might be left-handed. This can be done left-handed. The only difference in the stitching is if you did it left-handed is your decreases. If you're knitting left-handed, your first decrease would be knit 2 together, and your second decrease would be the SSK. Because you're going from the opposite direction, you have to work your stitches in reverse. Because with right-handed, it's SSK, knit 2 together. Left-handed is knit 2 together, SSK. So that's how you would compensate in that part. But other than that, the whole thing is done exactly the same. The slip as if to purl is the same. The knit is the same. And the purl is the same. 2 more stitches. Okay. I usually pull it up a little bit, so when I trim it, I hope I didn't get out of the camera view. I'll go back and look and see. But then you pull it tight, and there it's done. And as you see, it gives it a really nice, pretty ridge when you do it that way. Thank you for watching. I hope you watch part 3, which will be the bottom half, which will be the body itself. And if you enjoy these videos, please subscribe, hit notifications, so when the next one is finished, you'll be one of the first ones to see it. Okay, I forgot to show one thing. If you measure this at this point, as you can see, it is 5.5 inches now. Let me enlarge it a bit. So for the 3 to 6 month size baby, newborn, the 3-month baby, the sleeve has to be 5.5 inches. As you can see, that additional thing we did with the 10 rolls here comes up to being 1 inch. And then the bind off adds another 1/8 of an inch. But all total, it comes up to 5.5 inches as what we needed. Now, when you do the next size up, the sleeve is going to be longer and you add more rolls. You do the same thing, put the little spaces every 10 stitches. So when you get ready to start your second sleeve, you can take a pencil and write. It took me 34 rolls to get to that point, to the 4.5. That way, when you get ready to do your second sleeve, you know you do 34 rolls before you start your pattern. Now, I'm not going to show doing the second sleeve. I'm going to head and do that next. So I'm going to jump ahead to the body. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention. Now we get ready to do the other sleeve. We've got this back before the sleeve. So what you would do is, I always put the sleeve in the back. If you're working on the circular needles, you would slide them over, just like we did with the front stitches. You slide them over. Now, if you had them on stitch holders, you just move it, the stitch holder to the left, to your right, and just pick up your stitches off of your stitch holder for your sleeve and put them back on the needle, just like we did for the first sleeve. So you have to, when you get to your next sleeve, if you're doing it on the circulars, there you're ready to start your next sleeve, which is right here. Now, if that was on a stitch holder like that, you would slide them off the stitch holder onto a different needle, and then you would begin working on it just like you did with the first sleeve. And these would be also on a stitch holder, or in this case, because I'm doing it on my circular needle, it's still on the circular needle. So my front is here, my sleeve is done. I slid all my back stitches over, so I'm going to start knitting my second sleeve at this point, just like I did the first sleeve. And then we'll worry about these stitches after we get this other sleeve done.